I never thought a number could weigh more than my body, but that morning, the scale blinked 640 under the clinic's cold light. He said, maybe nursing isn't your field anymore, with a smile that pressed harder than any diagnosis. Then the fax machine spat, a single line county health grant review. 60 days, a countdown stamped like a sentence I hadn't served yet. Let me take you back to where that silence began. Beep! The fluorescent light buzzed overhead as the scale flashed 640.0 in hard green digits. The exam room at Maple Creek Clinic fell completely silent, the air thick with disinfectant and unspoken judgment. Victor, the administrative supervisor, glanced at his clipboard before clearing his throat. Maybe nursing isn't your field anymore, he said quietly, just loud enough for two nurses nearby to hear. They froze, exchanged glances, then pretended to read their charts. Megan stood still. Her hand closed gently over the nurse pin on her chest, a faint metallic gleam catching the sterile light. She swallowed hard, her breath suspended in one small tremor, then steadied herself. No words, no protest, only the kind of silence that makes others uncomfortable. Out in the hallway, a faded poster flapped under the Vince Breeze County Health Grant Review 60 days. The paper rustled in a steady rhythm like a clock ticking down. Megan passed it slowly, her shadow stretching across the tile floor, merging into the pale winter light of early morning Ohio. You're still on leave, Victor added, his shoes striking the floor. Just protocol, she said evenly. No eye contact. A nurse across the room rearranged a tray, avoiding the tension in the air. The smell of sanitizer mixed with the faint hum of machinery. At the end of the corridor, Megan paused by the glass wall. Her reflection looked colder under the harsh white light. She unclipped the nurse pin, folded it into the pocket of her coat, a soft, deliberate motion as if afraid to scratch an old memory. In the break room, the coffee maker sputtered, dripping into an empty pot. She sat at the metal table, opened a lunchbox from yesterday, then closed it again. The radio in the corner murmured about the first snow coming to Ohio. Behind the thin wall, someone laughed quietly, a small sound that still managed to sting. Is she still trying? A woman's voice whispered. Don't, another replied softer. Megan took a slow breath. Her fingers brushed the cool pin in her pocket. Water weight, she murmured, the hint of a smile cracking like glass. I'll fix it. The fax machine whirred, and a single sheet slid out. Countdown, 60 days remaining. The glow of the printer caught her face, her eyes blinking once, then still. The glass door shut. The clock on the wall blinked, 7:30 a.m. A single footstep echoed down the hallway, thud, then silence. That silence hung heavy, dense as frost. Megan stayed seated, one hand over her pocket, hearing the faint buzz of the fluorescent light syncing with the quiet rhythm of her heartbeat. The refrigerator door groaned open, releasing a dim light over half a carton of milk and a few wrinkled apples. The radio on the counter crackled through static lake-effect snow this evening. Stay warm, Maple Creek. Snow whispered against the window pane, soft, steady, relentless. Megan poured the last of the milk into two chipped mugs, one for her, one for Eli. He sat at the kitchen table, his school boots left sideways by the door. The porch light outside stayed dark, the switch taped off to save power. Mom, he said, voice small. Are we? Okay, we're surviving, she answered, stirring the milk with a spoon that clinked against the mug. The radio changed to the local school forecast. She didn't listen. The sound of the clock ticking filled the kitchen louder with every second, as if measuring the distance between what they had and what they'd already lost. On the wall calendar, she had written in pen day 1 of 60 Dex Chapter 15 grant. The ink was still dark hopeful. Outside, the snow deepened. Megan wrapped her scarf and stepped out for errands. Across the street, Mrs. Klein waved with a smile that wasn't quite kind. You're on disability, right? The words landed sharp like ice pellets against glass. Megan's lips formed a polite curve. Just taking it one day at a time. she replied, brushing snow from her sleeve. Mrs. Klein nodded satisfied, never noticing how Megan's shoulders stiffened as she walked away. By noon, she found herself at Penny's Diner, her old comfort stop. The bell above the door jingled softly. The smell of bacon and bleach mixed in the air. She sat by the frosted window, the hum of conversation blending with the low rumble of the heater. "Grilled chicken," she told the waitress. "No bun." The young girl raised a brow. Still on a diet, Megan smiled again, practiced and thin. The waitress scribbled without looking, muttering under her breath. Steam from the coffee cup fogged Megan's glasses as the fax chime of her phone blinked. One new voicemail. "Dr. Rowe here," the voice said, calm and familiar. "We need you back when you're ready. Start with showing up." The message ended. The silence that followed felt heavier than any scolding could. She turned over the diner's menu, grabbed a pen from her purse, and wrote quietly on the cardboard, "Back 59 days left." Her breath clouded the glass before her as she exhaled. She pushed the cup of water forward away from the plate of fries and looked out. Snow flurries danced under the dim street lamp. Across the road, a porch light flickered in the neighbor's yard, weak but insistent, as if trying to remind her that something somewhere still worked. When Dorothy opened the door, the scent of cinnamon and the whistle of a kettle spilled into the cold December air. "You came?" she said, smiling through her thick glasses. "Good." Megan stepped inside, brushing snow from her coat sleeves. The warmth of the small living room wrapped around her patchwork quilts on the sofa, framed photos from decades at Maple Creek County Hospital, and the low hum of the heater beneath the window. On the oak table sat a neat folder labeled Grant Review. Submit. 21 days before 12:15. Beside it lay a blank white envelope and a pen waiting like a challenge. Dorothy poured tea into two mismatched mugs. "I heard about Victor," she said gently, "and the review. That man's always loved his paperwork more than his people." Megan gave a half smile. "I thought staying quiet would make it pass faster." Dorothy shook her head. "Quiet doesn't save patience." The kettle clicked off. The only sound was the faint rustle of snow brushing against the window. Megan watched Dorothy's old nurse badge glint faintly from a photo frame, a mirror of her own pen tucked in her pocket. "You know," Dorothy continued, "when I was your age, they mocked me too, said I filed reports too late, said I was soft, but one mistake I learned the hard way." She set her cup down. Silence helps no one. Megan looked down at her hands, knuckles pale from the cold. "If I stay quiet," she whispered, "I'm part of it." She reached into her pocket, pulled out her nurse pen, and clipped it onto the corner of the white envelope. The metal clicked against paper, a small, sharp sound that filled the quiet room. Dorothy's eyes softened, proud and sad at once. Megan opened the folder, smoothed a blank sheet, and began to write each word steady, despite the tremor in her fingers. Ultimatum effective immediately. She drew short bullet points, the ink firm and dark. "Within 60 days before December 15th, I will complete 6 therapy sessions and reduce at least 40 pounds under medical supervision. The board will restore owed overtime pay and commit to a staffing ratio of 1 RN per 4 beds. Failure to meet these terms will result in immediate notification to OSHA, the State Board of Nursing, and the County Grant Committee, which may delay renewal." She capped the pen, staring at the words. Her pulse thudded in her ears, not fear, but the weight of resolve forming in her chest. Dorothy leaned closer, voice calm but certain. "Now they'll listen." Megan signed her name. The nurse pen slipped slightly, catching light as if nodding in approval. Outside, a gust of wind swept across the porch, rattling the wind chime by the door. The distant church bell rang once, then twice, soft, hollow, deliberate. Her phone buzzed on the table. A message preview blinked from Dr. Bulka. "Rowe, I'll back you at review if you keep showing up." Megan exhaled, a faint smile forming. The teacup trembled slightly in her hand as she looked at the letter, the bold header, 60 days, now underlined in shadow and gold from the afternoon light. The kettle let out one last hiss. Snowflakes clung to the window, melting slow. For the first time in weeks, Megan didn't feel small. Snow blanketed the church roof like a quilt stitched in silence. The radio crackled in Megan's car, announcing final week before the grant board meets. On the dashboard, a handwritten note read, Day 56 of 60. Beside her, Eli hummed softly, then sang under his breath, Silent Night. Megan's smile was tired but real, the kind that held both exhaustion and peace. The heater whirred weakly. The windshield wipers squeaked across glass dusted with snow. Almost there, sweetheart, she said. They parked outside Maple Creek Church where golden light spilled from frosted windows. The choir rehearsed inside, muffled voices rising and fading through the winter air. Eli unbuckled and reached into his coat pocket. Mom, he said, handing her a folded sheet. They put your name under volunteer nurse. Her breath caught for a moment the simplest recognition, and it felt like sunlight. She tucked the paper into her bag. Guess I better show up then, she whispered, echoing Dr. Rowe's words from weeks before. The evening drifted quiet. Snowflakes clung to the wipers, each one melting as the car idled. Megan turned off the engine. Across the road, a pickup crept along the slick lane, its driver older cautious. Then a sharp skid broke the stillness. Metal scraped snow and ice. Hold on, she said. Megan grabbed her first aid bag and jumped out, boots sinking into slush. The headlights cut through flurries as she hurried forward. A truck's bumper was wedged in a snowbank, steam curling from the grill. Inside sat Mr. Hale Sr., breath fogging the glass, his hands trembling. Sir Megan called gently, Look at me. Keep breathing. A young man from the nearby porch dialed a 911. His doorbell camera blinked red. Megan knelt in the snow, checking the man's pulse, her breath visible in short bursts. Steady. That's it, she said, her voice calm, her hands sure. The nurse pin on her coat glinted in the flashing hazard lights. When the paramedics arrived minutes later, she stepped back, heart pounding, fingers numb. Eli stood by the car, clutching his scarf. You did it, Mom? She smiled faintly. We did what needed doing. The next morning, the grant review board assembled in the county hall, paneled walls, thermoses of coffee tension in the air. Megan sat in the second row, a single envelope on her lap, the Carter Protocol. Commissioner Alvarez adjusted his glasses. Before we begin, he said, there's something we should see. The projector hummed to life. On the screen, grainy footage rolled, the snowy street, the sliding truck, the woman in a nurse's coat kneeling beside it. Steady hands, firm voice. Miss Carter helped save a life last night, Alvarez said. Victor looked up sharply. The screen froze on the driver's face, his father. For a full breath, the room fell utterly silent. Only the clock on the wall chimed once. One of the board members murmured, Should we reward a rule breaker? Alvarez glanced at the others. Sometimes breaking silence is the only rule that saves lives. He signed the form with deliberate strokes. Carter Protocol approved for pilot. Megan blinked, not crying, not smiling, just breathing as warmth spread through her chest. A single drop fell onto the letter in her lap, leaving a faint mark over the spot where her nurse pin had rested weeks ago. Later, outside the clinic, Victor stood in the falling snow. He watched as Megan and Eli walked toward their car. The porch light across the street flickered on a small glow cutting through the dusk. Victor opened his mouth as if to speak, but only a misted breath came out. Then he nodded once, silent, humbled. The bell from the church rang again, echoing over Maple Creek. Morning mist clung to the porch railings, soft and pale after the Christmas snow. The email notification pinged on Megan's laptop, subject Carter Protocol implemented statewide. She leaned back in her chair, a wool blanket around her shoulders, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. Steam curled upward, blurring the edges of her reflection in the window. Somewhere in the distance, the church bell rang, the same one from weeks ago, but now its sound felt lighter, at peace. The porch boards creaked, and a familiar voice called from below. "Thought you'd be up already," said Dorothy, holding a folded newspaper. She climbed the steps, smiling, her cheeks pink from the cold. "You made the front page," she said, laying the paper on the small table. The headline read, "Local Nurse Changes County Policy." Megan exhaled, eyes tracing the bold letters, then the photo herself, standing outside the clinic, snow melting on her coat. "I didn't lose 640 pounds, Dorothy," she said quietly, a faint smile breaking through. "Just the weight of silence." Dorothy chuckled, her eyes soft. "That's the harder one to lose." They sat together for a while, the silence comfortable, filled only by the sound of melting snow dripping from the roof. A robin hopped across the porch rail, shaking its feathers free of frost. The phone pinged again. One new email sender, Victor Hale. 5 words. No greeting, no signature. "Thank you for my dad." Megan read it twice, the breath catching somewhere between her chest and her throat. She closed the laptop slowly. "Maybe that's enough," she said. Dorothy placed a hand on her shoulder, just a small gesture, the kind that said everything without words. Then she rose and started down the steps, calling over her shoulder, "Keep that light on tonight." Eli appeared at the door, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Porch light?" he asked. She nodded. "Go ahead." The click echoed softly as the porch light came on, its glow mingling with the first gold of morning. Together they stood for a moment, watching the snow recede along the edges of the street, the puddles catching sunlight like glass. On the porch table lay the nurse pin, resting beside an old photograph of her mother, and the faded sheet marked 60 Days Report. The paper fluttered once in the breeze, then settled calm, complete. The narrator's voice, warm and measured, would say, "Quiet strength doesn't shout for justice, it builds it." The church bell chimed 3 times, distant but steady. Megan smiled, leaning into the doorframe as light poured over her face. The porch glow merged with the dawn until the frame turned white. The porch light glowed steady now, and the nurse pin lay beside the folded report, not a weight, but a reminder. Megan's breath rose with the morning chill, lighter than it had been in months. Some battles, she realized, aren't about winning back titles or proving worth. They're about learning which silences to keep and which to break. Forgiveness, too, arrives quietly, sometimes in 5 words from the least expected place. If a moment of quiet courage once changed your path, tell us about it below. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, feel free to subscribe and stay a while.